thank you all for coming to my platform. How kind.
Thank you, Murray, very much indeed. It's a huge pleasure to welcome Murray to this National Theatre platform. Murray, as I'm sure all of you will know, has had a very long and brilliant career. He joined Theatre Workshop at Stratford East in the late 1950s, making the tea, I believe, sweeping the stage, playing modest roles. He went on to play Geoffrey in Taste of Honey, the title role in Brendan Behan's The Hostage, and to be part of the extraordinary original cast of Oh, What a Lovely War. And Murray retains very strong links today with the Theatre Royal, acting as its archivist. On top of that, he's had a very distinguished film career, which included winning Best Actor at Cannes in 1962 for the film version of A Taste of Honey. He worked many times with Ken Russell, he worked with Stanley Kubrick. And on television, Murray was in the very first episode of The Avengers, I believe, in 1960.
And got killed at the end of it. There's no justice for an actor.
And most recently, I think Torchwood you were in. So it's a very comprehensive career. But today, what we'd like to do is talk for a little while about Murray's years with Theatre Workshop, and we'll talk for 30 minutes and then open it up to questions. So Murray, can I whisk us back, or whisk you back really, to 1958 and A Taste of Honey? And I was looking up today Joan Littlewood's book, Joan's book, where she says the original script by Sheila Delaney was a mess, and that neither of the first two actors she approached, Avis Bunnage and John Bay, wanted to be in it. So my first question to you is, how much work did you as actors have to do on that script to make it stageable, basically?
Well, to go back to that first statement, it was going to be, Theatre Workshop was penniless. And Michael, as you well know, derisory the amount of money from the Arts Council or the local councils. And they were broke. And it really was going to be the last play, because I've got a recorded interview with Avis Bunnage, who created Helen, in which she says that she'd left the company, gone back to Manchester, and she got a call from Joan saying, now Avis, I've just received this play, young girl from Manchester. It's about Manchester. It's a small cast. And we've decided that we want to put this on, and then that will be the end of the Theatre Royal, and it'll be the end of Theatre Workshop. So I want you to come back and play this part. And Avis, no, Joan, I don't want to. No, I've gone. I've left. When Joan was in that sort of mood, you couldn't refuse. And so she came back to do this last play. It was a five-hander, as you know. Normally, Joan liked large cast plays. She liked moving lots of people around, and she could do it. But it was just five casts, and in those days, they were on, the proper players were on £4 a week, and I was an acting student, AS whatever, and I was on 2. So, you know, it didn't cost very much to put it on.
But it was going to be the last play.
It was going to be the last play.
Had it not been a success, Theatre Workshop,
No. You would have had no Hostage, no Oh, What a Lovely War, no.
And so, coming back to my point about the scripts, I mean, how much were the actors helping to, I don't know what the word is, improve or change the script?
I mean, Sheila was 19. Yeah. I mean, she'd done a lot of writing, but this was her first play, and like any 19-year-old, she put it all down. It was all there. And so Joan's way of working, whether you were doing a contemporary play or Ibsen, would you call contemporary? You probably would in 1958. Willie or Oh Rare Ben, I mean, the process was exactly the same. You broke the script down into units. It's basic Stanislavski, broke it down into units, worked on it, improvised it. Always, what was the author's intention for that moment?
Can you think of any specific examples of moments or lines in Taste of Honey that came out of rehearsal or improvisation? Were there any particular moments you remember?
Oh, well, there was one line that I know everybody gets confused about. It's Peter. On one of his visits, he goes off to the loo and he comes back with a line to get him back on stage. And there's a line about the cockroaches. They're playing leapfrog. And Johnny Bay thought that was a bit, didn't like that very much. And they were debating this line. And of course, I was busy looking after Joan with her gouloirs and making the tea, and doing the props. And I had a pair of rope-soled shoes. And I stood on a clout. Now, theatricals know what a clout is. For those that, clouts were what you put canvas onto frames. It had a long shank and a very large round bit, so it didn't go into the canvas, it stayed on top. And I stood on it, right. And that shank went into my foot, and I yelped and hobbled to the side of the stage and showed everybody what had happened. And half of them ran off because they couldn't bear to look at it. And I said, "Pull it out. Joan, just pull it out." And she looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, please, just get it out." And so she did, God bless. 1, 2, 3, and it was out. And as it came out, I used, my generation, I knew it well. It was a Barra Boys saying, which is, "Shan't be round tomorrow, the cat's been all over the strawberries." And so as it came out, and the blood came out, I said, "Oh, shan't be around tomorrow, the cat's been all over the strawberries." And we took my sock off and did the blood and put the sock back on, and we were ready to work. And as we got back up from the stairs, Joan turned to John Bay and said, "Listen, that was a good line of Murray's, you could use that."
And it's still there?
And he did. He loved it.
It's in the printed text?
It's in the printed text.
Any other examples? I mean, Avis Bunnage, did she...
Oh, yeah. Oh, Avis, yes. There's a lovely line. Because we did this in 5 weeks. And everything was behind. And John Berry, our then designer, the workshop's designer, who later came here, and then to Glyndebourne, he was making the set. I mean, I helped him in the first act, but I hadn't got much time off in the second. And he and Jerry Raffles, who Jerry was Joan's partner and also the manager of Stratford East, they just started putting up the set. And Joan was ready to start this sort of basic run-through. And so it was agreed that Joan would start and they would carry on backstage getting the set up. And the first thing to go up was a little window. And so they put ropes on it, and Jerry was one side of the stage, and John was the other, the two heavyweights pulling their weight, as you would say. And so we started, and they were putting this little window up, and the window was swinging because of the length of the rope. And it was about halfway up when Avis came on with the opening line, "This is the place," and the girl says, "I don't like it." And Avis looked, and she looked at this thing swinging in the air, and she turned front to nobody in particular and said, "Damn silly place to put a window." And Joan from the circle said, "Keep that in, Avis." And Avis said, "Oh, no, Joan, it was only just I said, keep it in." And she did, and it is.
That's a wonderful example of how plays get on, particularly at Theatre Workshop. You've anticipated the question I was going to ask, though, but I'd like to take you up a bit more on this, about Joan's method of working. I mean, everyone reveres this great director. Not many people have had the experience you've had of working with her constantly. You said she broke the script down into units to find out the intention a la Stanislavski. Yes. I mean, just in a normal day's rehearsal, I'm just trying to get the picture. Was Joan an intervening director, or did she let the actors run on with a scene and use their improvisatory skills? I mean, I'm trying to get pinned down how detailed a director she was, or how much she let you carry on with a scene and build up your own momentum.
She always said directors were not necessary. Don't believe it. Michael, I think I've said to you before about her productions were also almost Mozartian in their layers of speech. Joan loved 4 dialogues going on all at once, but you never ever missed a word, because the hours that were spent on the gradations of sound, she spent days on it sometimes.
You see, this is absolutely fascinating, because I saw some of her work in later years, and what always came across to an audience, I think, was the sense of spontaneity, of actors, engaging with the audience, varying performances, possibly night by night. I may have told you this before. The first Joan show I saw was Make Me an Offer in the West End. And Roy Kinnear at one point turned to the audience and said, I don't know, he said, 6 years in rep and here I'm humping furniture around for Joan Littlewood. I'd never heard an actor refer to the director, in the middle of a show.
Yes.
And I thought, my God, this is amazing. But the more I saw of her work, the more I saw it was exquisitely choreographed. That was the word I always used. Is that fair?
No, absolutely fair. Choreographed physically and vocally. Because don't forget that, we said this before, one of the main things of Joan was Laban movement.
Explain that a bit to the audience.
Laban, Michael.
Sorry. Well, not everyone
Well,
will know
it's
what you mean.
totally opposed to classical dance, of which I was trained, so did I suffer. But the wonderful thing was I could use my body. Well, Matthew Bourne was a Laban boy. It's based not on posing, like dance classique, but on efforts of the body.
Right.
Sky, middle, down. And everything that you do with your body in Laban, you can do with the voice. And so when I joined as a dog's body in September of '57, and in March I played A Taste of Honey. Now, there were times I didn't, in retrospect, I sort of realized I sometimes didn't know what I was doing, but I was dancing it because my vocal output was dance.
Right.
And so it's very important. So once you got that, when you refer to choreography, yes, indeed, but of the voice as well as the body.
But was a lot of rehearsal time spent on that? You talked about the
Oh,
choreography of the voice.
enormous. Well, you did the words last.
You did the words last?
Yes.
What
And if
did
they
you do
didn't
what
fit,
did
they
you do?
would change.
What did you do? So what did you do first?
Well, you danced it.
Literally.
Yes.
So she got the physical movement of a play before she got the...
Yes, so that
verbal.
so that you were aware of your physicality to the other characters.
Right, right. I'm getting...
Queens are always given 10 paces, aren't they? You don't get near you give the queen five yards, so that's what makes her a queen, because you step away. So it's a basic rehearsal.
So, I'm just getting the picture, though. So Joan would work on the physical shape of the play and the movement of the play, you're saying, before you got really into the details of the text.
Oh, yes.
So,
The first thing she would say was, throw those bloody scripts away.
Really?
Oh, yes, of course.
Well, you say, of course. It's an unusual
Well,
way to work, isn't it?
any workshop member would know that, because you knew what you were working on. You knew that it could be 3 lines, it could be 6 lines, it could be a whole, but you knew what it was. So you concentrated on the physicality and the efforts of the character before you got to their words.
Right. So did that mean then, she would basically run through the play very early on to get the sort of physical shape of it?
No, scene by scene.
Scene by scene, right.
Scene by scene.
Right.
She would build it up.
Yeah. And then later on, in week 2, whatever, you're starting then to get into the actual
Unless you were
text.
doing a classical piece, but then you would sit down with Ben Jonson and go through it.
Yeah, right.
And cut it. Well, playing time for every man in his humour. If you played as Rit, you're talking about 3 hours 25. We got it down to 2:25 at the one interval.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm glad.
And
to
so
get
you
the
would
picture.
you would go through the script first, the words first of a classical piece, whether it was Ben or Will or whatever, or Vanbrugh, and then having basically got it, then you would move it, as she would say.
Right.
There came a moment when she said, right, that's enough, let's move it.
Right.
And then you would move it. And then you would go back to the word once you'd got the truth of your physicality and where you were.
Right. Going back to Taste of Honey specifically, they were a very young actor, ASMing as well as playing Geoffrey. That's what I find extraordinary. Was Geoffrey a very...
Oh, and letting the curtain down on the first act.
That was your job?
Yes, I couldn't pull it up because it was too. You know, I'm a matchstick. But Jerry used to take the thing, and I used to drop it at the, and then put the record on the phonograph for the interval music.
You had a pretty full evening, what with playing
Oh,
Jeffrey.
yeah, hadn't got much time to get nervous, that's for certain.
Was Jeffrey...
But you were never nervous for Joan. You were never nervous for Joan because because you knew why you were walking on that stage.
Right. Was Jeffrey, at the time, 1958, a very unusual character, would you say?
Well, as writ,
As writ?
yes.
What I'm getting at is, at that stage, we're talking 58, aren't we?
Yes, and you remember, you've got the Lord Chamberlain.
That was my point, yes. We've got official censorship. It is very rare, I would have thought, in the late 50s, to see a homosexual character on stage. And
Well, he wouldn't have allowed it.
No.
That's why the fine line had to be drawn, because he wouldn't have allowed a homosexual. We didn't have the word gay then.
No, quite. That's why I didn't use it.
No, yes, no, quite right. A homosexual character to be there.
No. So therefore, this was something of a breakthrough, to have this character portrayed very sympathetically by the writer on stage.
But his sexuality wasn't what was important.
What was?
What he was.
Which was
What he did. Yes.
a caring and loving man.
Yes.
Looking after this
Yes.
woman. Yeah.
Basically an ASM. So I knew that because I was one. But that was easy.
It always strikes me that Geoffrey is also the most perceptive character in the play, because he says something I think is absolutely crucial to the play. He says to Jo, the girl, at one point, that she and the mother are really very similar. They're two sides almost of the same coin. That's a blindingly good insight, isn't it? He sees the similarity. They're not two separate people. No. They're very similar people. He's a very intelligent man, is what I'm saying.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. But you know, everybody's got a fault. All the characters have got a fault. That's what's so intriguing. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you think that, you know, there were about two critics, not you, Mr. Billington, but there were two critics at the time said, oh, you know, how could she possibly let that character come and talk to the audience? I mean, you know, breaking the fourth wall is theatrical, you know, tradition. I mean, how could she do it? You thought, well, at the time, well, how could she put the play on? That was you know, against all traditions.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, it was Joan doing what she used to call her continuous loop, about getting a problem of the streets, bringing it into the theatre, working on it, and then presenting it out again to the audience. And I mean, five. Look at those characters. You've got a sailor with a child in every port.
Yes.
You've got a single-parent family.
Yes.
A teenage pregnancy.
Yeah.
That homosexual boy. A loutish lover.
Yeah.
I say today that, you know, if that script landed on an artistic director's desk today, he'd probably send it straight to social services. But in 1958, she gathered all that together and created that out of Sheila's script.
Can I lead you on to the next major play which you did at Stratford East, which was, of course, The Hostage, Brendan Behan's extraordinary play, The Hostage, where you played the young British soldier who's being kept hostage in this Irish stew, as someone called it.
My favourite part forever.
Was it really?
It really was. I remember it with such joy, the laughter. We never stopped laughing. It was just one. And by that time, I was beginning to get the hang of Miss Littlewood's methods.
What do you mean by that, exactly? You said you begin to get the hang. What do you mean?
Well, it was very difficult to learn. As an actor works with any director for the first time, is getting used to their shorthand. Mm-hmm. And it was difficult. I had to pick up the company, the old company, did Laban for years under Jean Newlove. And so it took a while to get into that and see how she used it. But then once I did, The Hostage, I suddenly sort of found my feet.
I remember The Hostage as even more radical in a way, because that was a play where the relation between the audience and the performers, I mean, the wall was completely down, wasn't it? In other words,
I always say that Honey was Joan's answer to television. Now, I can't prove it, but I've always thought it, because if you think 57, 58,
Yes.
I mean, television was colour was coming in, CinemaScope. I mean, nobody got off their sofas. Death of variety, death of the music hall, almost death of theatre.
right.
Because, I mean, as we know, people shouted at the television. They threw their teapots through the television. They kicked the television. Well, one thing television couldn't do was answer back.
So therefore,
And so Joan went back to traditional English music hall where somebody went out there.
Yes.
And if there was an answer back, which there very often was, Avis very got, when she used to tell you, well, you know, when you got a cold, you don't feel like anything, do you? And you know, some nights people would say, oh, no, you don't, do you? And she'd say, well, you know what I mean. And off she, you know, and it was this wonderful, and of course having, and it was deliberate because, of course, she had the John Wallbank trio out in a box to break that fourth wall. And we weren't allowed to do it. Francis Chuka, who created Joe, and myself, we weren't allowed to do it because we hadn't got the experience. But Avis was the only one.
But in The Hostage, it seemed to be it was
There were,
much...
yes, after Honey, and she saw the result and the effect, we all talked to the audience.
Yes. The Hostage was like some great party, wasn't it, I remember, to which the audience was invited. That was the extraordinary thing about it. We felt we were participating in this extraordinary event.
It was very difficult for piece to do, because it seemed like a party, but believe you me, it was, yes.
Go on.
But,
Go on. There's something behind that
no,
remark.
but it was an extraordinary, wonderful piece. And then we had Brendan Behan to cope with. Who would I remember Howard Gurney playing Pat. He got to the end of the song, one of his songs, and Brendan was in the audience, as he often was. And he often, as Howard finished singing, from the audience, Brendan got up and said, I've written you another verse. And then would sing it. And of course it was funnier than anything he'd given Howard to sing. And of course the audience just loved it. But of course we on stage were there with cold water on our face while Brendan did his turn. And I remember one night Howard, at the end of Brendan's turn and the audience just calming down, Howard said, now, Brendan, can we get on with this dreary old play of yours?
I'm leading you very quickly through, extraordinary
I say,
production.
potted version of one's life.
I'm
here.
sorry, yes, but we can't not talk about Oh, What a Lovely War, which of course has just been revived to great effect at that theatre. One thing intrigues me, when you were putting on the original production in 1963, when you were working on it, and I know that the actors were extremely important in contributing to the actual script of that show, was there did you have an instinct that you were doing something that was making history as well as portraying history? Did you feel at the time this
No,
was
of
going
course
to be
not.
significant?
No, we realised once, our homework, of course, no matter what you were doing for Joan, the amount of homework you had to do was enormous. The reading that you had to do, the discovery you had to do, it was enormous. And for that, we were always at it all the time. And so, don't forget, the reason we were able to do it was that a few years before, the 50-year secrecy rule was up.
Right.
Yes? And so one was able to get at the unofficial records rather than the history as writ from the establishment down. And I remember every morning we would all meet and she would pick on a theme. First Battle of the Somme, Ypres, gas. And you'd go away and do your homework and you'd come back and you'd all report what you discovered and what you thought was the salient bit.
Right.
And then whatever was important, you would then improvise around it. Right. But I remember for the company, we were brought up on history as writ from the top down. And so the discovery was also ours of the horror that we'd got no idea existed.
Right, right.
And there were some mornings when we were there reporting at 10 o'clock, the whole company were in tears at the horror of what went on in our name, and never reported by anybody. And so we sort of rewrote history in a way.
Was there
The historians will hate me for it, but we did.
Yes, yes. Well, this is the whole point. I mean, this was the First World War seen from a perspective we had not seen before, that of the common soldiers.
Because we were always told it was glorious, and all the flags went up and the bugles blew.
What I find fascinating, though, is that, I mean, even today, debates still go on about Oh, What a Lovely War, because I was involved, I told you, in one the other day on the radio with a historian who was challenging the historical accuracy of some of it. So it's wonderful that it is still a controversial, a living issue. But, I mean, I want to introduce the audience in a second, but just looking, we've dealt very quickly with three major productions at Theatre Workshop. And you said earlier, and it was fascinating, that Taste of Honey could have been the last show. We know what happened. It became hugely popular, goes into the West End. The Hostage, hugely popular, becomes a West End success. Oh, What a Lovely War, again, international success. Was the success of those and other productions like Things Ain't What They Used to Be, was that in the end the undoing of Theatre Workshop, do you think? Because the company began to...
Well, she changed, but Joan had that famous statement, I built my life on the rock of change. And so she did, daily. And so she did change, because up till then, you'd have to have 7 years training on Laban to work for her. But when the company was dispersed, that original workshop company was gone, and so she had to bring new people in. There wasn't time to train them for 7 years on Laban.
Right.
It had to be instant.
But
And so it did change, but she changed with it, and she grew with it.
So you don't think that dissolved the sort of Theatre Workshop spirit, the fact that these productions were going around the world?
Well, not the spirit, no. But no, because always working with Joan was a joy, as well as being heartbreaking. If you could stop yourself crying, stop yourself laughing. The atmosphere, it's still there today. I always think even Stratford today, there is an atmosphere in that building that's still Joan and Jerry.
That's interesting, yes. And you are very conscious of that because I know you work in the archive. You are the archive, basically. And you feel her presence still.
Oh, yes, yes. I say good morning to them all when I go. Morning, Avis. Morning, Joan. Morning, Jerry. Yes, of course I do. Yeah, it's still there. Because that atmosphere is still there in that theatre.
That's very...
It's still a joyous theatre to go into, Michael.
It is a joy. No, I've been going there, since I came to London, and it's one of my favourite venues to go to.
I remember in the early days, Philip Headley, when he was in charge, getting me to talk to the young ushers. They usually come with because it's like a university, Stratford. We've got our drama groups, and we bring, if they want to write, we encourage that. If they want to do lighting, we encourage that. We get front of house people, and he used to make me tell them the story that in my young day, when audiences were scarce before the success of Honey, the audiences were scarce, and so one was very grateful for anyone that came through the doors.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was an unwritten rule, but it was just done by the company that at the end of the performance, even if you were dashing off somewhere, you always went into the bar, and if there was somebody there, you always thanked them for coming.
Right.
And I still do this with our ushers today. They always, you have to explain to that younger generation, they're called houses. And so you welcome somebody into your house. And that still carries on.
That's a very good example of the way the ethos continues today. I'd like to throw the questions open to the audience, if I may. We've only got about 10 minutes left. Could we have the house lights up? Thank you very much. Yes, and if you've got a hand... Yes, gentleman there.
You mentioned in passing the Theatre Royal itself as a building, and I think it would be nice if Melvin mentioned how it kind of encompassed the approach that Joan Littlewood had, because it's such a beautiful little theatre in and around.
Right. Gentlemen Gentlemen wants to know about the Theatre Royal Stratford East itself and how much you said that encompassed or encouraged even the style of Joan Littlewood. That's a very good point. How much was her style?
Well, at the end of her days, she loathed it. I mean, it was too constricting. You know, she'd go on about these bloody proscenium arches, you know, get rid of them. She was into street theatre, she was into... I see these pop concerts these days at the O2, and all those flashing lights and those thousands of people. That's what... Well, that was the germ of our idea for a fun palace.
Right.
That's where it came from, to have moving spaces. She didn't want this one set thing. No, she wanted moving spaces that you could change in an evening for a concert, for a cinema, whatever. She'd gone past that. Unfortunately, her fun palace, which is now being revived by lots of young people who have suddenly... She was ahead of her time, but they're catching up with her. That was her goal. Her life had been about that fun palace. And it really did destroy her when they pulled the carpet from under her and cancelled it. It really did hurt very, very deeply because she realised they couldn't keep up with her imagination. It was a very sad moment for her.
But going back to that question, which I think is a very interesting one, I mean, the kind of informal approach you talked about earlier, addressing the audience directly, surely was easier in a theatre like Theatre Royal Stratford East, you know, seating what, 550, 600, I don't know, than it would be, say, in the Olivier or the Littleton, you know, because the building allowed you to do that, didn't it?
Yes, but it wasn't done. Legit actors didn't do that.
Until she came along. No?
Until she came along.
No.
Unless you were in variety or not. There was the fourth wall and you pretended nobody was there.
Yes.
And so it wasn't easy for my generation, for her older members of the company that had done village halls or the miners' community centres in Wales. Yes, they were used to it. We weren't. And so, yes, we did have to work like a stink at it. To dare.
But it's a friendly space, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Which allows...
Well, any space, well, you know, once you break it down.
Where you looking?
Well, I'm going, you know, look at it, look. BP filling station, I mean...
Well, I'm sure the National will be pleased to hear that. Yes, next question. Can I go, the gentleman in the second row, and then gentleman in the sixth row. Gentleman here?
Yes. Do you recognise the spirit of Joan Littlewood in any of today's directors?
Do you recognise the spirit of Joan Littlewood in any of today's directors?
I recognise it when I go into the theatre and you have an empty stage, and then they play some music, and there's a shaft of light, and somebody comes on with a stool and sits and starts the piece. I think, oh yes, well, we did that 60 years ago. Yes, in that way I do. But that also becomes out of John Berry and the design of the workshop. Remember, the design of the workshop was European theatre. The workshop was European theatre. And no one was doing that at that time. Well, from the 40s, from the end of the Second World War, nobody was... We were still into box sets and lots of footlights and people painting their faces. The workshop, and that's why it took a long time for her to be accepted, because nobody really knew what they were doing, because they didn't know any. You know, Daubney did the wonderful World Seasons at the Aldwych, and everybody wet their knickers by all this stuff, and Brett came over. And you thought, yes, but the workshop had been doing that for 20, 30 years, and they were ignored by England and the Arts Council and the powers that be. So yes, there is an influence.
There was a gentleman, yes, behind, yes.
Did you find any limitations with regarding A Taste of Honey? Any limitations or advantages in the translation from theatre to film?
Did you find any limitations or advantages in translating Taste of Honey from theatre to film.
Yes, because it did change, didn't it, from one room to the moors of Derbyshire with a flock of sheep. Yeah, no, we played Honey at Stratford, I think, for initial 4 weeks. Then it was redone before it came into town. So I played that boy for almost a year. And in the way Joan worked, I knew that boy so well, you could have stuck me on a wire on a balloon and I would have known what to do with him. So no, although it was all different, no, I never had any difficulty in translating. I had a lovely moment when I had to go into a maternity clinic and get the doll that the girl has. And I remember it was a real maternity clinic, and there were these Manchester girls, and I came through the door. They set up a camera. They didn't tell anybody what was going to happen, and the girls were waiting to see the nurse. And they didn't tell anybody, set up the camera, and I just came through the door. And little me with my little bag over my shoulder, and it was very cold up there. And I came through this door, and 10 young pregnant girls, just their eyes just went to the door and looked at me. I didn't have to do anything. I just crawled in. But yes, no, I had no difficulty doing all that.
What about re-relating to different actresses? I mean, in the shape of Dora Brown and Rita Tushingham, was that a major shift for you?
Yes, because they were totally different. But again, because I knew that boy so well,
Yes.
I could adapt. That was my greatest task, was adapting to their different performances.
Of course.
As any actor would have to do.
Of course, yeah. Good. More questions? Yes. So, in the middle row, yes, gentleman there.
What would you like to tell us about Sheila Delaney herself?
Oh, what would you tell us about Sheila Delaney?
Oh, lovely Sheila. Oh, she was lovely. Oh, dear Sheila. She was so beautiful. She was magnetic. And also, of course, she had that wonderful voice. It was such... When Sheila was talking, and nobody very rarely mentions Joan Littlewood's voice, it was so beautiful. Even when she was telling you off and tearing a strip off you, it was still very, very beautiful. And to hear the two of them was just magic. Yes, she was... Yes, I was always our Murray. Always our Murray. I loved it. I remember, you set me off now, on the first night, Sheila was in the theatre, and she'd been there quite a few times, and she'd met my parents a few times, and on that first night, she came in, and there was a seat vacant next to my mother, and she said, "Oh, Maze, can I come and sit next to you?" And my mother said, "Yes, of course you can, darling." And she said, "Are you feeling nervous, Sheila?" And she said, "Oh, Maze, not as nervous as your Murray."
Wonderful. Yes, very time for one more question, if we're very quick. Yes, lady, we haven't had a question for lady yet on the aisle.
Murray, you've had a very distinguished theatre and film career. As an actor, a distinguished actor, what advice would you give to younger actors, and how do you feel that your theatre discipline has fed into your film career?
Right. What advice would Murray give to younger actors, and how has your theatre career fed into your film career? Two big questions.
Yes, enormous. I wouldn't dare give any advice to a young actor, except if you want to do it, then you've got to hang in there, and you have to suffer, because for anyone, it's those... Joan always used to say, you're not in the next production, that's good, because now you can study. Now you can go, she always used to say, I want you to go to every art gallery in London. I want you to look at those pictures. I want you to read the plays. I want you to go to this. It's a wonderful training period. And when she first said it to me, I thought, but it was true. And you just mustn't give in. And of my discipline, and why I think initially I could stomach Joan's tirades and that is because, although on an amateur basis, I'd had a classical dance training. And once you've done that, discipline is second nature.
There we have it. Thank you very much. Before we go, I mean, I firstly want to thank Murray, but just 1 second. Before we go, there's someone waiting, I know, in the wings, who's grown to love the part of Geoffrey, which we've been talking about tonight, as much as you have. And that person, as you may have guessed, is the person who's currently playing it in the National Theatre production. So would Harry, who I hope is there, like to come on? Here he is, Harry Heppel. Thank you.
Oh, how lovely to hear. How lovely to see you, dear. Well done. Oh, it's a lovely part to do, isn't it? Was it for me?
Thank you both. Thank you, Harry, very much. Thank you, Murray, very
Lovely
much.
to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bless you.
Harry Melvin.